So today, we're going to talk about a story that, well, it started as this single, really desperate mission to save just one life. But it spiraled into a national tragedy, one that forced everyone to ask some really tough questions about aviation safety.
And it really all boils down to this one number, 7. That's the number of lives lost on a mission to save just one. Think about that. 7 people, all crammed into this air ambulance for a critical medical flight. This was supposed to be a lifeline, right? A flight to get a patient the help they desperately needed. Instead, it claimed every single person on board. This quote here really gets to the heart of it, doesn't it? A journey of hope that ended in unimaginable loss. It was all fueled by a family's desperation, their hope. So to really get a handle on what went wrong, we've got to start with who was on that plane. All right, let's talk about this journey of hope. Because before we dig into the nuts and bolts of the crash itself, you have to understand who was on that flight and why they were there. I mean, this wasn't just some random flight number on a departure board. This was everything. Okay, so at the center of this was the patient, a 41-year-old man named Sanjay Kumar. He had suffered really, really severe burn injuries. And his family, well, they did what any of us would do. They did everything they could. They actually borrowed a huge amount of money. We're talking nearly 7 lakh rupees just to charter this private air ambulance. I mean, that was literally all they had, and all their hope was riding on this one flight. And you know, the plane wasn't just carrying Sanjay. It was a whole team. You had the 2 pilots, of course, but also a doctor, a paramedic, and even 2 of Sanjay's relatives who were acting as his attendants. So that's our 7. 7 people, all focused on one single critical mission. So what exactly happened on that fateful flight? Let's walk through the timeline, the sequence of events that led to this absolute tragedy. Okay, here are the key facts. The plane itself was a Beechcraft C-90. The operator, a company called Redbird Airways. They were flying from Ranchi to Delhi on February 23, 2026. You know, on paper, this should have been a pretty routine medical flight. But when you look at the timeline, a huge red flag pops up right away. It was scheduled to leave at 5:30 in the evening, but it didn't actually take off until 7:11 p.m. That's almost a 2-hour delay. And then, get this, just 23 minutes after it finally got into the air, it just vanished. All contact with air traffic control was gone. And that brings us to the million-dollar question, one that Sanjay's family has been asking from the beginning. Why was it delayed for so long? They've actually suggested it might have been over money issues, and you can bet that's now a massive focus for the investigators. What we do know is that in its very last moments, the flight crew radioed in. They asked for permission to change their course. And the reason? Weather. There was a big thunderstorm rolling through the area, and it looks like they were trying to fly around it. But right after they made that request, the plane just blinked off the radar. Now here's the thing. This horrible crash, it didn't just happen out of the blue. To really get the full picture, you have to look at what else was going on in India's aviation scene right around that same time. It paints a pretty troubling pattern. So just a month earlier, in January of 2026, there was another crash. A Learjet 45 charter flight went down, and all 5 people on board died. This was a big deal too, because one of the victims was actually a state deputy chief minister. Then, in February, the very same month as our air ambulance crash, a Pawan Hans helicopter had to make an emergency landing in the ocean. Now, thankfully, everyone survived that one. All 7 people were rescued. And that brings us right back to the Jharkhand air ambulance crash. So you see these 3 major incidents, one after the other, all within a matter of weeks. It starts to paint a really worrying picture, right? And it shines a spotlight on these non-scheduled flights. The charter planes, the air ambulances, they often operate on much tighter budgets and, historically, haven't gotten the same level of scrutiny as the big commercial airlines. So as you can imagine, this string of accidents set off some serious alarm bells. It forced India's aviation authority to act, and to act fast, and that led to a whole new set of safety rules. The agency that stepped in is called the Directorate General of Civil Aviation, or the DGCA for short. Basically, they're the top dogs in India when it comes to aviation. They make the rules for everything: pilot training, aircraft maintenance, you name it. And the DGCA's response was, well, it was a big one. They rolled out some major new rules. First, they said operators now have to make their safety records public, total transparency. Second, more surprise audits, especially of things like cockpit voice recorders. Third, way stricter penalties if you get caught breaking the rules. And finally, they're going to be looking much, much more closely at aircraft maintenance and how pilots make decisions about flying in bad weather. So, with these new rules on the books, what happens next? Well, the focus now is on two things: the official investigation and what this all means for the future of flying in one of the fastest growing aviation markets on the planet. Right. So the official investigation has been launched. It's being handled by India's Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau, the AIIB. They've already sent a team to the crash site to start collecting evidence, looking for the flight data recorders, the black boxes, to try and piece together exactly what went so terribly wrong.
But we shouldn't hold our breath for quick answers. Anyone in the industry will tell you a plane crash is almost never caused by just one thing. It's usually a whole chain of events, a combination of factors, and untangling that entire chain, well, that can easily take a year, sometimes even longer.
And all of this leaves us with a huge, critical question hanging in the air. India's aviation market is just exploding. It's one of the fastest growing in the entire world. And as its skies get more and more crowded, the challenge is just immense. So you have to wonder, will these new rules actually be enough? Can they prevent the next tragedy and make sure that a journey of hope never ever ends like this again?